All right. Well, I have to say, I think for the last 3 years I've done a Wednesday afternoon panel, and I've never seen a Wednesday afternoon panel this packed. So obviously we've got an interesting topic, and it's one that I hope to learn a lot about. I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Dana on my left.
Dana Hustedt. I am the Director of Esports at Grandview University in Des Moines, Iowa.
John Knauss. I'm a product manager in esports for Riot Games, maker of League of Legends.
Eric Darr, the president of Harrisburg University.
Jonathan Long, now esports consultant, played 2 titles professionally.
Great. And I'm Ryan Craig, and I'm probably the least qualified moderator at this conference. I wrote a piece a couple months ago about esports, somewhat critical of esports. So I think Deborah thought I would be an interesting interlocutor for our guest, but I promised I'll be gentle. Really, I'm here to learn, as you are, I'm sure. When I was in college, the name of my hard drive on my computer, my Mac SE, was actually Stop Playing Games, in large part because my college roommates kept on taking my computer and playing games with them. Of course, the games back then were pretty lousy. Today, it's a world of difference, and the games are very social, in many cases, sort of a primary form of social interaction. But I want to start with a basic question, the sort of querying the whole concept of an e-sport, and really asking the question is, in what sense are these sports, and how do they compare to traditional sports? Then we'll move into the question of sort of where the industry is today and what's actually happening on college campus. But I really want to get a sense from our panel to this question: is, are these sports? My first question is, the rules of sports, they don't change very quickly, right? Baseball, I think, is contemplating some pretty significant rule changes, but maybe for next season, but maybe they happen every few years. These games, my understanding is that there can be patches that are almost monthly, right, where the rules are changing. John, you want to start with that?
Sure. This is, when we're talking about esports, sort of new territory. There isn't a great parallel that you can draw to traditional sports in a lot of ways. But what we see is the engagement that people have with esports is very similar to traditional sports. We all have things that we do and are passionate about. And watching people do those really well is something that we find often enjoyable. And so these are games of a great degree of skill that people spend hours and hours of day practicing and watching other people play to learn. But it's also a great form of entertainment to them because it's watching people do something you're passionate about really well.
That's great. So I want to get to some of those skill questions in a second. Does anyone have anything they want to add to? Am I right? The rules are constantly changing here of these games, of these sports.
Right. So a new meta, which is a patch, right, comes out, changes characters, changes rules, changes weapons that are available, changes the nature of the game. And in a professional league last year, Overwatch, the championship, which was in the Barclays Center in New York, sold out in an hour. 13,000 of my closest friends were watching with me, and the game had changed from the semifinals to the finals, and favored one team that was better prepared for that change in rules than the other team.
Wow!
And unfortunately, it was for me, being from Pennsylvania, the Philly Fusion had not prepared as well as the London Spitfire, and got their butts handed to them. So.
That's a whole new dimension that we haven't seen in traditional sports. That's really interesting. In terms of skills or athletic ability, I definitely take what you're saying. You the same way you watch sort of Lionel Messi, work magic with a ball. These people are working magic with a device. I suppose. I suppose you are or were a gamer. Sort of tell me in your words, sort of how you think about that.
I guess a good way to put it is, of course, you're going to have the same athletic ability as hand-eye coordination, mental, cognitive ability, being able to process what's actually going on. And of course, it opens the doors to people that aren't available to play in traditional sports. So maybe a kid is in a wheelchair, can't play soccer, but loves to watch it. Maybe he gets turned on to esports. He can compete in esports. He realizes he's good, and he can actually make it to the next level too. So it's a gateway too for people that aren't involved in traditional sports too.
That's great. Other thoughts on that? Dana? Yeah.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, many of these games are team-based games, and you know the same things you learn as growing up in any team sport. How do you handle losses? How do you handle wins? How do you handle a disagreement with one of your teammates? How do you communicate well within the game? How do you communicate well outside of the game? How do you work together to achieve an objective? All of those, you know, how do you put together plays together as a team, just like you would in soccer or in basketball or anything else? And those dynamics and those skills are still required in these sports as well. The point that Jonathan just made about, I think, critical thinking skills and the ability to concentrate for a very long time is a key piece, right? You know, and I would say it's much more difficult than, say, a sport like baseball. And yes, the traditional thing is the hardest thing to do in the world is to hit a baseball, particularly a curveball. I get it. But the time required for concentration there is in very limited spurts. In esports, you may have to concentrate for 3 hours, 4 hours at a time, depending upon the game. And, you know, the stereotypical view of an esports player as a Cheeto eating, Red Bull drinking person who sits on the couch in the basement is not at all true of professional players. Somebody that's that physically out of shape is just incapable of concentrating for 3 or 4 hours. And so you have to be in a decent physical shape to be able to compete at the highest level in these games.
I'd like to add one more thing too. I come from a traditional sports background. I was a college athlete in softball, and moving into the esports industry, I can tell you right now that the critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skill sets that come from these esports players is second to none. It's more than a lot of the teams I've played on and the teams that I've also coached. It's a completely different realm that a lot of the average citizen does not understand. And it was a huge eye-opener for me as well, because I was that traditional sportist.
So I've watched darts on television, and I've seen those players. They're not in great shape. So tell me about what sort of training, what physical training is required here. Do you need to be in great shape to be an esports? I mean, I get the concentration part, but I could imagine you could concentrate for 3 hours and still not be physically fit. Do you need to be physically fit? And how do these teams or even professionals stay physically fit?
They do. With our professional leagues, we've seen great growth in the science of the sport, which is how do you get these athletes to be their peak self? And it's gone from sort of what you would think of in the past to now there are training facilities that each of our professional teams run that have state-of-the-art like eye tracking, nutritionists. It was with the amount of time that they spend trying to improve and get better, diving into everything from the analytics to the physical side of it. They're working, 12 to 16 hours a day as professionals training, and they would simply break down if they did not have the physical side of it as well. So now a large part of what these teams do on the professional level is train the pros up so that they can do and perform at peak performance throughout an entire season.
It sounds like the training's even more complicated, right? For a traditional sport, while you're playing, you're physically, you're maintaining physical condition. Here, you're moving, but you're not sort of, you're moving only certain parts of your body. So you have to have a whole separate physical regimen that's outside of the gameplay.
Right. So at Harrisburg University, the varsity players are mandated to participate in physical training outside of time that they're practicing the game, because you're exactly right. It's a different set of activities.
Yeah.
There's countless studies that physical fitness breeds mental fitness too.
Right.
So you can't be mentally, let's say, perfect without having a physically fit body. So you can't expect someone to either play collegiately, balance a workload or a class load, train for 4 or 5 hours a day and not work out. It's just not going to be viable.
Is that a surprise to students coming to campus looking to participate in esports? Is that like a rude awakening for some that it requires that, or do they come sort of expecting this is serious in the same way that you would be required to be all in
No, I
varsity
think
sport.
because they see what John just said, right? So if they're, if they're watch the Overwatch professional league, they understand that these professional players have nutritionists and are participating in physical activities, and so they expect that, many of them aspire to be pros themselves, right? So they see where the pros today, the kind of daily routine or weekly routine that they have. So, students, kids don't like having routines, but they're not surprised by the fact that they have to participate in these things.
And just to level set, what games are we actually talking about here? We're talking about Overwatch, League of Legends, what other?
Hearthstone, those would be the biggest. Those would be the biggest collegiate games.
Correct. Yeah. Rocket League too now.
Yeah.
And do players, I'm talking generally professional or college esports, I assume they specialize, or do they cross different games or platforms?
Collegiately, I would say 9 times out of 10 they're definitely going to be specialized, because they're not going to be able to go to class all day, do that homework, and then go to 2 practices while getting physical training in every day. It's just not.
So Grandview fields different teams in these different
Absolutely,
games.
yeah. You're going to be specialized, and you're going to have one job to do.
Yeah, that's what universities across the country. That's what they do. They have, they pick whatever titles. You can't pick a esoteric game just because you may have students interested. Because if you have nobody to play against, then it's not really that interesting.
And are these teams different sizes depending on the game? League of Legends team might be larger than a.
Yeah, so Overwatch is 6. League of Legends is 5.
Okay.
Hearthstone is 1.
Yeah.
And then help us understand in terms of sort of the additional skills and strategy that goes into it. Are these games sufficiently developed now? There are, as you were talking about with Overwatch, there are clear strategies that you have to learn. Are there different positions that players are playing within the game and so forth?
Yeah, so you can draw a pretty close analogy to football, which is there are different roles for each person, different positions that usually play for team-based games. But the strategies, these games have been around, Overwatch for several years, League of Legends for 10 plus years, and what is developed is a very complicated strategic game that is very similar to what you would see in football in terms of each team has something that they want to execute on. They also have on the professional level and on the collegiate level, they have analysts and coaches who all spend their time prepping and coming up with strategies and training the team on how to execute plays, essentially, in a digital space.
So it's not only specialized in a game, it's specialized to a position in a game.
Got it. And how much does the equipment matter? Does it matter at all? In terms of what your controller is or how fast your connection is? Are those factors that you're concerned about?
Every player is concerned about response time. So obviously the size of the internet pipe, but also the response time now of the display itself. And they demand the best. And players typically will, particularly on the pro side or at the highest level in collegiate, will bring their own peripherals. So they have a keyboard that may be little and pink. That's the one they love, and they bring that in, and they have their favorite mouse, and they have their favorite headphones, and they'll bring all of that just like you would bring your cleats
separate pad and your
Exactly, right. So they bring that. At the pro level, you check in your hard drive. The hard drive is scanned to make sure there's no cheating devices of any description, nothing. And so the hard drive is scanned and locked prior to the game, and then you swap out hard drives in addition to peripherals.
Really interesting. I want to sort of broaden it out and sort of talk about this. How big are esports, broadly speaking? Professional esports. Let's start with that. Give us some numbers or scale, Jonathan. If you
Sure.
can.
So for some context, we make League of Legends. It's currently the most popular esport in the world. We have multiple leagues all over the world in countries. Those leagues are part of a larger network that then come together and play something we call Worlds, which is World Championships. It's sort of like FIFA brings together teams from all over the world to compete. We do this once a year. For the finals that we had this year in China, 99.8 million people watched worldwide. Over the course of any given month, hundreds of millions of people will play League of Legends. A large portion of those will watch professional League of Legends. And to give some additional context on the economics here, and this is not just League, but Blizzard has Overwatch, and Overwatch with Bobby Kotick made a big push. They have franchises, which they've sold for $20 million a piece to their leagues.
Talk about Faker.
Yeah, Faker, one of the largest esports professionals, the most famous esports professionals in Korea. Something to keep in mind is that the US is, from a development and acceptance of esports perspective, is lagging way behind what we would see in China and Asia, where this has been a hugely popular in terms of mainstream investment, engagement, TV shows for the better part of 15 years.
So in China, you'd have 10 times the number of people here, or you wouldn't have a panel at all because it would be considered ridiculous to even discuss it because it's so accepted.
Yeah.
So this player Faker made what, somewhere between $7 and $10 million.
$7-10 million
last year.
last year.
That's from winning competitions.
That was
salary, sponsors,
salaries,
stuff
sponsorship,
Wow.
just like any professional athlete. So, esports, second most watched sport on the planet, only behind soccer.
So obviously Blizzard and Riot and so forth fueling this, but it sounds like it's being fueled beyond that by the same way that marketers are looking to get eSports to communicate to their audience and consumers. They're doing that here. So how are they do by sponsoring players? How else is money coming into this industry?
Sponsorship, one, obviously,
Sure.
is in the collegiate scene as well. Where we want to look for people who are willing to support our schools, but also our team, because we are that new sport at a lot of these institutions. We have 300 plus now, also going back to how esports is growing in the collegiate scene, 300 plus schools. We're seeing having to campaign for those sponsorships. The branding of the companies want to come in and they want to be your supplier. Omen by HP, HyperX, all of those people want you to be using their equipment.
And it's not just endemic sponsors, it's local sponsors, whether those are banks or community kinds of businesses that want to sponsor. And it's the same at the pro level.
Yeah.
You see the Pepsis and the Cokes.
And they're there at the event and obviously present on the stream as it's being streamed.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about on campus today. We have some numbers in terms of, I think I read 100 colleges and universities have launched varsity esports programs.
Probably 130 in NACE.
Yep, in
NACE
NACE.
is the National Association of Collegiate Esports, the governing body for those of us that have varsity programs, meaning we give scholarships. Beyond that,
300 plus now.
Plus, I think closer to 450.
Oh, yeah.
Universities that have significant clubs. Or
right. And I assume that most of these varsity programs began as club teams, as many of these varsity sports.
Ours did.
Yeah.
Ours did, technically, yeah.
We've also seen that some colleges and universities are actually launching academic programs in esports as well. So I received a mailer. Someone who reads my stuff sent me a mailer from Florida Southern University, which says I know you can't see this, but it's pretty elaborate. It says, now a new game has arrived from Florida Southern, attracting more viewers in the World Series with the baseball logo, attracting more spectators, or more fans in the NBA Finals, more spectators in the Stanley Cup Finals. There you go. There's the puck, and then it opens up and says, esports, we're in the game. Florida Southern College, along with more than 100 other colleges and universities, has launched a varsity program in esports. Esports are a game changer for colleges, and they have Overwatch and League of Legends and Fortnite and so forth. So clearly these schools are looking to use esports programs to help attract students. Are you seeing that?
Sure,
Yes.
as you would with
Yes.
with any athletic program, right? That's why you
Correct.
get into athletics. But to your point about academic programs, different than the athletic programs. So, there's a whole ecosystem that's to what we were just talking about, the growth of this as an industry, right? And there are events and production and post-production and technical skills that are required, the skills associated with being casters or announcers, if you will, the skills associated with being analysts or coaches. There's an entire ecosystem and a workforce that does not exist today to support these events. So Comcast in Philadelphia announced they're constructing a $50 million arena, but they have no workers to work the arena, the technical aspects of putting on these events. And so universities like Harrisburg University, like Ohio State, there are others that have announced that have an esports management program, an esports interactive media program. These are to create the workforce that will continue to fuel this industry. And it's very sophisticated technical skills about how do you put on these events and how do you, which are much different than traditional sporting events. And they're much more like a music event or a concert or.
And especially at Grandview University, and with you people wanting to start programs, I have brought 30 individuals to Grandview University for esports. That's a huge number for a small private institution in Iowa. We're also providing them a home and a community in esports outside of video games. It can be content production. We have graphic designers. They might be in accounting, but they want to take a job and go be an accountant in a semi-professional league. Look at the career paths we have here that we need to create and educate to those high school students and younger, that this is an opportunity for them and they can find that home in our universities.
It's fascinating. So Eric, at Harrisburg, how many students would you say are involved in your esports ecosystem in total? Hundreds, it sounds like.
Hundreds, yeah. Between 200 and 300 students.
That's fascinating. And I assume it's more than just the teams at Grandview as well. You have the full production and support.
Not full production yet, probably sitting right around 35 people.
Wow, that's great. And it sounds like we're seeing students. So you're able to recruit students. You're offering scholarships. How are you finding these? I mean, how are you assessing students? Or you're able to view their performance as high school athletes? How is that working?
You want to go or I'll go? Or either one?
So there's no really set place to find all of your recruited students. I find them by word of mouth. I find them via online clips that get sent to me in Discord, friends of friends. Now that we have those high school systems, those are going to be the feeder options for us to go and look at. A Reddit post, it could be as simple as that, to find somebody across seas that wants to come to the United States and play on an American team. So your guys is different than the way Grandview does it, so it's always interesting to hear other perspectives.
Right, so we, a year ago, put out a call, and Discord, for those that don't know, is kind of a social media platform for esports. You can even set up private servers within Discord. Twitch's channel for esports, Reddit. But we put out a call that because we offered full scholarships to Harrisburg University. This is the only sport that we have. We have no other teams, being a science and technology university. So this kind of fits with the mission of the institution. And we got, for 3 teams, we were going to hand out 16 scholarships. We got 500 applications online. Many of them included video reviews, VOD reviews of a player and their strategy and how they did. And you can look at statistics online. These games themselves, inside the games, keep track of statistics. So you can see global rankings for players. And so we, focused on the top 1 or 2%, and we're talking millions of people around the world. And we flew 36 people, 2 from Poland, 6 from Canada, the rest from the United States, to Harrisburg and did in-person interviews. And going back to the notion that these are team sports and we wanted to see a player's leadership style, how they communicated with other players. We flew the #1 ranked player in League of Legends at the college level to Harrisburg, and we denied him entry because he was trying to be on his best behavior, but he was an ass in person. and you can only imagine what he would have been like had he been granted admission. And so, for us, then we took 16 players out of that 36 and built a team. And we also then recruited coaches in a similar way, and so it's, it's.
That's a level of vetting that we don't see in traditional sports.
You have to, in order to be successful in this and creating that culture on your campus. you have to know who you want to be around. One, your coaching staff, towards your players. What are you trying to create at your university? What do you stand for? And that's why we do those vetting processes. And it's extremely important, as any of you are moving forward, that you do make an intricate system.
So, and how are you tracking student success in these programs? We're very focused on student success and completion and graduation rates in traditional sports, and it may be too early to talk about graduation rates, but how would you characterize student success? How are you measuring student success?
I'm sure Dana will say the same thing, but these are student athletes, students first, right? So they have to meet the admission requirements, and they have to maintain satisfactory academic progress the way any other student is judged, which is the way the federal government assesses these sorts of things. And if not, a variety of things. We've removed players from the team for lack of academic progress, which is problematic when you don't have a lot of subs to sub in, right? You're now hurting very much the competitive nature of your program, but you have to stand for the integrity, the academic integrity of them being students.
Academic accountability policy. When my students walk in the door, that's what they're signing. If they want to be part of my program, this is what it is. And if you miss more than your 3 classes for the semester, each one of those is one missed practice, and then how do your teammates feel? We can't have a productive night. So that's how that goes, and they know that. And it's also part of, you can't not show up to your job, right? We have to teach them those life skills now, and that's just part of what we're doing on the college campus.
We talked a little bit about diversity. I would imagine that's a challenge, both sort of gender and race and ethnicity. How are you dealing with that at your institutions? I don't know if you have a thought on
I mean, I would say no one's closing the door on it by any means.
Right.
Of course, it just depends on who applies.
Right.
So if we're trying obviously to diversify everywhere we can, but if those people aren't applying, then that's an issue.
Right.
And we got to get back to the root cause of why they're not applying and why they're not getting involved in esports to begin with. I think that's kind of a bigger conversation than what we're trying to have. But
It's well documented. Diversity is a challenge in competitive esports, and so I would. There's a session right after this session that talks about a group that's part here in California and part in Pennsylvania that is aiming to try to attract young girls, particularly into middle school and high school, into the esports area and interest. And for us, we have no girls on our varsity team. We have the president of our esports club is a woman, and so we try to have as many women role models as possible in esports. It's the same trying to attract women into science and technology jobs, and so it's a challenge, but there's a lot of things you can do, and you can't just, to your point, right? You can't just throw up your hands and say, well, it's just the way it is, right? None of us think like that.
Right. I've seen an interesting dynamic just because I am a female in the esports industry and in a position of what I'm doing as the director of a program. I have 4 girls in my program now. 2 are on my varsity Overwatch team. And for next year, I have probably 20 applicants that were females, where I had only 4 from this past year. So I'm seeing that change, but it also could be because, one, you do have a female in a situation, and some of my students have even said, I wouldn't have stopped at that table that I saw you at, honestly, had you not been a woman right there. So it's always something it's kind of exciting also to hear them. We want to light that fire for them as well, because this is a place for all of them, regardless of gender, to be included at our university.
I'm curious, are there gender differences in games in terms of performance? Are there games where you'd say we wouldn't want a man playing this role or this position, women do a better job? It's completely, you wouldn't know whether the player is a man or a woman from watching the sport.
No, not at all.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, the statistics are, though, just, in terms of popularity, right? You see a lot more women in Fortnite and now in Apex than you do in necessarily, say, League of Legends or Overwatch.
Sure.
Right? So it's trending in the right direction.
In terms of employability, so obviously, working in the esports industry, John, give us a sense of how big that industry is. What sort of level of sort of job demand is there?
I mean, what we're talking about here is an industry that 10 years ago was measured in the tens of millions of dollars and now is $1 billion+ industry worldwide. And just as you would expect from any business that has that much money involved, from the professional and collegiate level, it's become very clear early on that anything that you would need in a traditional sport, from a GM of your team to chief of operations to a really good coach to analysts to support staff to top-notch training facilities, and all those people that go into supporting that are just as necessary in esports as they are in traditional sports. And so those roles of that you would find from anything from the player management side to the league operations side to the running professional team side, all those, if you look at their traditional equivalents, are now being filled and needed as well. So there's a humongous need within the industry for people that have these skill sets and this experience.
Right. And Eric, to your point, do you think the ecosystem is producing very employable work experience across the streaming and production and support
content
categories?
creation and social media? I will also say for our students, we now have 22 players on scholarship, but they take majors like biotechnology. Yes, many are in computer science, and yes, many of them are in active media, but some are in forensics and, as I said, biotechnology. So like in any athletic, college athletics, right, we're providing students an access to education where many of them wouldn't have had that access before. And they may end up in the esports industry, and many have that interest, but some will go on to become a doctor, or who knows where they're going to go. And we gave them the opportunity through video game playing to get a great education.
Just the amount of time spent interacting on and through screens, is there any sense in which that is, understand all the potential benefits and capabilities that are developed therefrom, but any sense in which sort of other social skills and interacting sort of person to person become an issue, and that it may hold you back in terms of employment or employability down the road? Any thoughts on that?
I would say anybody that's going to be competitive in any esport has to have great interpersonal communication skills, because that team environment won't thrive without that interpersonal communication, like structure developed. And that goes back to establishing like a healthy team culture at the very beginning of your program. That makes it very, very easy to just have a healthy team environment where people can express their ideas and work through issues just like you would on a football team or on a baseball team.
That's great.
Same exact concept.
So I'd like to go down from, maybe start with Dana and come back down to Jonathan. Tell me, you predict in 10 years' time, what is the campus, I know that's a long time horizon, but what does the campus sports environment look like? What do esports look like on campus, and where are traditional sports? Has esports sort of taken market share away from traditional sports on campus? Where does it rank on campus in terms of popularity, in terms of participation, in terms of watching, in terms of fans?
Well, I think right now you're obviously seeing several of the universities' esports is slowly creeping up on those basketball and football teams. It's only going to become equal and or above that. Obviously at Harrisburg, they are that one sport, but it's a pride thing. We are building a brand identity within esports, and some people are going to start going to universities because they want to identify with the esports team. It's just like going to Duke because I want to be part of Duke because there's basketball there that's really good. That is going to become a thing with esports. I am going to want to go to a university and be part of that program because of esports.
Yeah. What I'd say is, in 10 years, you would see esports as much more of the college experience, from where you'd expect it to be from someone who played these games competitively growing up, played them in junior high, at high school, and then going to their university and building a strong bond with the esport they play, and having that as an avenue to express how much they love their university, and then also what the college experience is in rooting for a place that you go to school. I would say something that we should expect different is, whereas we have a couple major sports right now, esports is transitions a lot quicker, and there's more esports that come up, and it's very tied to the games that you played growing up in terms of what you want to watch. And so it wouldn't be quite as monolithic as what we see right now.
It's not a single.
There's more diversity potentially in how people engage in what sports are there.
And they probably view themselves as a League of Legends fan, not so much an esports fan.
Exactly.
Probably. Do you think people, I'll come back to you, Eric and Jonathan in a second, but are people going to be playing League of Legends? Obviously, you hope people will be playing League of Legends in 20 years or 30 years, but these things I assume are fairly generational, right?
Esports hasn't been around long enough to answer that question, but a lot of the traditional titles have been going on for 20 plus years. Counter-Strike as a great example of something that is still going to this day. And what we see is between the different genres of esports, there is overlap in fandom. So like between Counter-Strike and Fortnite and those type of games versus Overwatch and more team-based games.
Right.
I would say if you're a fan of one esport, say if I'm a Counter-Strike fan, more than likely I'm going to go sit down and watch a League of Legends game and interact with those fans and feel right at home. They're going to explain the game to you, they're going to bring you in and actually want you to interact with them too. There's not like set boundaries in terms of what you can and can't watch.
Got it. Eric, in terms of the future?
You'll see universities have a significant infrastructure, sink millions and millions of dollars into training facilities, into arenas. Those arenas may be done by the university itself, or in many cases, like you see giant stadiums today, they'll be done with the particular town or city that a university sits in. You'll see competing for coaches, just like you see today, competing in basketball or football for the top esports coaches. You'll see player recruiting done in a very sophisticated way, partially because the analytics that are possible in esports are much more fine-grained and there's many more data points than you might have in other sports. So the recruiting will be a significant piece. You'll see analytics. You'll see the way students are developed to become esports competition different. You'll see TV deals being cut like you do today in other sports. ESPN and ABC are broadcasting the final 8 for Overwatch this year in Houston. Harrisburg University is one of those 8. Just a note. So those TV deals will continue to expand and provide money to universities to continue to invest in esports like you will in other programs.
May even have parents cheating on college admissions by masquerading their children as successful minor esports players.
So you've made it right somewhere where you see that. Okay, now we've arrived.
John, thoughts on the future?
I mean, you can see how far it's come in the past 2 years in terms of universities. You can only imagine how far it's going to come in the next decade. Of course, more and more scholarships are going to get rolled out. Hopefully, a more solidified organizational body comes along like the NCAA and kind of ingrains some type of sustainability inside of programs, which would be nice. But yeah, I would say sky's the limit in terms of esports and universities.
Okay.
That last point right there, gentleman to my left, interesting dynamic that'll play out, right? Right now, you don't see the NCAA running all of these things the way you do in other athletics, because nobody owns baseball or football, right? Riot owns its game, Blizzard owns its games, and the NCAA right now has to decide what role does it play and how does it work with Riot and Blizzards of the world. And that's going to be a negotiated ceasefire, if you will, and it'll frankly come down, I think, to money, as it almost always does.
That's really, okay, one final question for the panel, starting with John, going back down to Dana. You have a child. Are you going to favor, which would you prefer? Did they play a traditional sport, play an esport, or are you truly indifferent between the two?
I would say I'm truly indifferent because I want them to be as happy as they want to be. When I was younger, I turned down a A&M baseball offer to go and play professional esports, so that's the route I took. But obviously, whatever makes him happiest, I'll support.
Yeah.
Yep. Same thing, indifferent, whatever makes him happy. My son learned to read playing a game called Civilization. He and I would play Civ. It's been out for nearly 20 years as well, so lots of good can come from esports.
Yeah, indifferent as well. The skill sets that you build in esports are the same skill sets that you would build in other traditional activities. Teamwork, self-improvement, all these things are very, very important. And so finding one that they connected with and wanted to improve and get better at, I think, is the most important.
Dana, final word.
Indifferent. I mean, obviously, I want him to play softball if I played softball, but it's okay. No, I think it definitely comes down to what makes them happy. Can I teach them the interpersonal skills, the business skills, communication skills? And if that can be through esports, I mean, that's what I'm doing now as a full-time job. So whatever my child wants to do, have at it.
All right. Well, that was highly educational for me. I hope you agree. Thank you for taking the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.